Okay, we are back after lunch for a panel to discuss how to come back to business, right? After going through a big corruption scandal. As you may all know, Odebrecht was involved in one of the biggest corruption scandals in the world, and it settled the cases, I would say, with the authorities. Rafael Gomes, he's the Chief Compliance Officer for Novonor, formerly known as Odebrecht. Richard Bistrom, to my right, he used to be top international sales executive. He developed a very successful career. Later on, he was convicted for corruption. Nowadays, Odebrecht is back in business. Richard, you have become a leading figure in the compliance, I would say, practice around the world. So the key point is to discuss with both of you guys how to make that transformational journey possible. Okay? You have been through a lot, the company and the individual in this case. It's a fantastic opportunity to have both of you together. When we were preparing the panel, we identified some points in common and some differences as well. But both were emphatic in identifying cooperation as the first step into, let's say, remediation. Okay, how we get out from that and make it an opportunity. Rafael, let's start with you. What can you say about cooperation in the Odebrecht case? What did cooperation mean?
Muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Un placer estar en Buenos Aires. Luego, por 6 años estuve responsable por una compañía que está del otro lado de la avenida Madero, ¿no? En Torre Alem. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the honor to be here with Richard. When we talked about, what from the moment you start cooperating is the moment you start healing, and it's the moment you start dealing with the issues, and then that's, depending on how you do it, it will define how much success you're going to have in what comes later, which is, okay, it is past us, it's behind, but then now we need to go to the different stakeholders and make sure that we're welcome again, that we're actually going to have projects and we're going to be able to build, new highways and airports and refineries and whatever, the challenges that may come. And I'm not sure if you know that in terms of, just for one example, Odebrecht built in distance highways that could connect Buenos Aires to Moscow.
Wow.
And then you have other examples like having built 4 huge hydroelectric plants, power plants, in 4 different countries at the same time. And there are companies that have never been able to build one that size. And now this is this uphill battle to make sure that we regain trust, that we reopen doors, that we tell people what we have done in the past 7 years to fix, and to be accountable for the mistakes and to fix, many of those, and a total, reform in the company in terms of having the priority to act, with ethics, integrity, and transparency. And this is the journey we've been on for 7 years now.
Wow. So, I'm used to hearing enforcement authorities talk about cooperation as a key element in achieving a successful result in any of these cases. I'm not so used to listening to, a representative of a company like yours that has been through a major case being so emphatic about how cooperation is the first step, right? So this is truly valuable, at least from the corporate side. What about you, Richard, as an individual?
As an individual, first, it's such an honor and pleasure to be here, Gustavo, and to the Marval team and Rafael, and to join this interesting individual and corporate perspective. And as Rafael said, when you make the decision to face justice and not to delay it, it's a line in the sand moment, because from that point forward, your life, your behavior, everything you do is going to change. So there was a great quote from the Hiltrud Werner, who was on the supervisory board of Volkswagen at the time they went through the diesel scandal. And during a press conference, she said something I'll never forget. There are 3 stages of this process. Shock, when you get a call from the Justice Department and UK authorities that you're the target of a criminal investigation, there's the shock. And then comes the shame. And there's no way to mask that. You are filled with regret, you're filled with shame, and from an individual perspective, like I found that I had to embrace that shame and embrace that regret, and not to try to say, well, it wasn't that bad, because it was that bad, and my behavior was that bad. And I think when you go through those 2 steps and embrace them and don't try to engage in ethical spinning, right, then change becomes possible. And I'm talking about, like you've been sharing, we're talking about real change on a personal and professional level.
So you would also say that cooperation is relevant in terms of starting that journey into change?
Absolutely. When I got a call from my attorney that I was the target of a criminal investigation, he said, oh, well, we have some choices. We can challenge the government's evidence, or, you know, we can cooperate. No offense to the attorneys here, but I said to my defense attorney, can we just save that billable hour? Because I did it. You know, I engaged in a decade of misconduct. And I said, I didn't take this international job to end up in prison. So, you know, it was an emotional decision. And I said, if I wanted to change the trajectory of my life, I need to face justice. And that meant telling the government crimes that they knew about. But you look at my plea bargain, most of the crimes that are on my statement of defense are bribery conspiracies that I told the government about. So as the Justice Department said to me, you either cooperate or you don't cooperate. There's no such thing as midway cooperating.
Selective cooperation.
Selective
Right?
cooperation.
It doesn't work. And it's one of the things is that once you start that process, it may be that you don't, as a company, it may be that you don't even know how much is going to come up, right? And how bad it's going to turn. But once you start, there's no going back. So you cannot just say, no, oops, I changed my mind. No, and then with that, you end up providing information. As we were saying, the countries and the businesses, they're not contained within walls. And so you're doing business internationally. You have operations in 23 countries at the time. The problems could be, you know, anywhere and everywhere. And then comes the problem with, I think that there was a question here today about how the UK and the US, there's an investigation and it's in parallel. So think of dealing with 20 or 10 different jurisdictions, different maturity of compliance-related laws. Some don't even know what a leniency agreement, you know, was at the time. They wouldn't know, and they wouldn't have procedures, and their prosecutors wouldn't be allowed to bargain. They cannot agree on a lesser charges or something. Oh, I'm obligated to go, you know, and all in, and then it's okay. Then it doesn't work. You know, kind of cooperation is this? There's nothing in exchange, and so this ended up where we are today, where the company has reduced probably about to a tenth, if you think of the engineering and construction business. There's some other businesses that have different dynamics, but in the engineering and construction business, one of the biggest customers is government. And if not, you have projects that are financed by multilateral banks, and then you're also not going to participate in those, and you're going to be banned in some countries. Some other countries are going to treat you just like expropriate your assets and seize your accounts and freeze your accounts, and you're just simply, you're gone. And some other countries, we were able to sit at the table and try to come to, you know, to terms. And we're still, you know, still doing that, still reopening doors. Still, my agenda is 2-3 times a week. It's an international bank that is financing a project, in Peru or in Africa, and wants to know, what did you do about all that mass, right? And we're telling the story and explaining how our compliance program has evolved for 7 years, and how the compliance program has become a part of our day-to-day of our work. Our employees know what they're supposed to do, what they're not supposed to do, and it takes a lot of energy to keep that, up, because it's not like, okay, we're done. No, you're never done,
You're never
right? And we're investing, and we've invested $100 million in our compliance program in 6 years, the group. So, and we're not stopping. I have 20 people on my team only for the engineering and construction business, and we keep pushing for, for improvement, and to make sure that compliance that people embrace the culture of compliance.
That's a clear message, for sure. And it's interesting, I can relate to your description on how investigations for these big cross-border corruption cases go, where companies, in the end, face a team of prosecutors from different countries, a team of judges involved, a mix of different regulations, and I really loved what you said, with different levels of maturity, right? And those prosecutors have different types of capacities to settle. Some of them can, some of them are not allowed to settle. So it's really, really complex. Again,
And
it's
different
fantastic
levels.
that you mentioned that.
Different levels of political will and resolve as well.
Absolutely. So we've read, and there is a lot written about the Odebrecht case, right? And there are documents available, so lots of information out there. But Richard, in your case, there isn't that much of information out there, but you've been through a lot, right? We have talked about this many times. You were under investigation by the US authorities and the UK authorities, and still you are one guy, right? You're an individual, you're not a multimillionaire, right? So you had to make quick decisions on how to behave, and you were able later on to capitalize on those very, very tough times and use that to somehow explain to companies the situation that Rafael is explaining, along the same words. How was it for you to be under investigation by the US and the UK at the same time as an individual?
It felt like a lot of trains were heading at me at once.
A lot of trains,
to
a lot of
say
trains.
the least.
And those were big trains, right?
They were big trains.
Yeah.
And Dan earlier in his panel talked about parallel investigations. It's nothing new. I was carbon copy prosecuted by the Crown Prosecution Service and the Department of Justice. But when you're cooperating, that's a lot easier, because then at least I was able to sit with my attorney, with the Department of Justice, with Crown Prosecution Service, including HMRC, Revenue and Customs in the UK, and we were all there to work together to come up with a settlement and a charging document where both the United States and the United Kingdom authorities felt like justice was done. And in my case, it meant that some of the trade violations that occurred, because the UK nexus is that I was living in the United Kingdom for part of my 10 years as a sales executive. So they wanted to charge me with trade offenses. And the way that they worked together is the United Kingdom said to the United States, as long as you put those trade offenses in his US charging documents, we're satisfied that justice was done and that he'll pay the price for what he did when he was over here, as opposed to opening up a new case in the United Kingdom, which would have made a lot of things complicated.
Wow.
Which is a difference from the corporate side, because on the corporate side, because there are lots of penalties to be paid, damages potentially, and contracts that are to be earlier terminated or not, when unilaterally, fairly or not, it doesn't matter. In the end, those, there's not the same principle doesn't apply, which is one country charges you, maybe the US, the Swiss, and the Brazilian authorities split the first big fine, But then again, each and every country wanted their piece, because there was also ramifications here, and you have to pay for what you've done here. So that's a multiplier effect of those consequences.
Certainly complex situations, right? So Richard, you know that investigations is one of the big topics for this conference. I mean, it has been over the years. And we have discussed how stressful the situation was for you when you were interviewed by US authorities, UK authorities, and also by the company during the internal investigation, right? And you were able to draw some important notes there on the investigation or the interviewing techniques, I would say. Without departing from the main topic of the panel, give us a few comments on this point particularly.
Yeah, and I would reflect on what Florencia and Maria had to share earlier today about the soft skills of conducting interviews. So when I got called in that I was the target of a corporate investigation, like I knew what was going on. I wasn't surprised by the call. And Dan and I have talked about this before. I was relieved. That's not to say I was happy that I got caught, but there was some sense of relief. So I walked into a meeting with internal counsel, external counsel, internal investigators, and external investigators, and me on a Sunday. And remember, I'm wanting to tell my story. And I think the external investigators wanted to demonstrate the value that they had to their corporate client by yelling at me and shouting at me.
That's value.
And trying to catch me in a lie, right? Instead of like being patient and let's peel one layer, he's talking to us. And it was a miserable experience. In fact, so miserable that I said, my attorney said, if you want us to continue to cooperate, those external investigators can no longer be in the room because they're not serving any purpose. He wants to talk and they're preventing him from doing so. So really think about the soft skills, because I think there can be mutual respect. Even in that shock moment, I think both parties can respect that, okay, everybody has a job to do here. It's not going to happen quickly, but let's be patient. And that was the opposite experience I had with the prosecutors, who were very, very patient.
Were you given an upjohn warning in that situation?
I didn't even know what upjohn was until I started going to compliance conferences. And then I'm like, I never got one of those. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's also something that there's this book called Trapped by John Hagen, I think, where he explains how sometimes when companies are trying to do what the government expects the company to do, so they believe that they're acting legally in the correct way, how ethically they're just throwing people under the bus and just disregarding rights, basic rights, and things that should be observed as the upjohn warning before starting asking questions about something that could potentially incriminate that person later on.
Absolutely. One of the points that we raise every year at this conference is that an internal investigation that is poorly handled will put the company into much more trouble than it had before, right? So an internal investigation is a tool. You can use it for good or for bad. I mean, it's no guarantee that it will work unless you use it properly. That being said, let's dig deeper into the steps to recovery. Both of you have a clear idea of where to start and where to continue. So, Rafael, let me give you what I think is in people's mind on how to turn around the company that has been through a huge, massive corruption case. Simply replace everything and everyone. Is that the way?
Well, first of all, that works for a company that is a true corporation in the U.S., where shareholders and the executives have no relationship, right? They're not the same people, they're not the same family, and so on. So, in a situation like ours, it isn't that simple. We have actually had 75 of the top executives of the company leave the company Some of them immediately, after the cooperation, the settlement. Some with a timeline, because they were the people who knew the business. They were the people who, you cannot just, throw the brain of the company away and think that the company will continue to work. It is not, right? And so it took a couple of years until all those, 75 left. But that's one part of the problem, because sometimes the person who's been through it, it could be that that person would be less interested in getting involved again than anyone else who hasn't, right? So you're not talking, as we have been studying in behavioral, economics, and studies show that people do not do bad things because they're bad, right? They do stupid things because they get into traps. And I think your experience is amazing for that, is how is it that you get entangled in that situation in a way that when you see you have crossed the line, and way crossed the line, and many steps beyond the line. And that is a challenge, to understand that it is not only about firing people, right? And say, now we're a new company. No, because the people who are working underneath those people and the next level, they have all been in the same company. And then that's where the culture has to play, a big part. Is how is it that you make compliance a part of a culture in a company that has not had that for decades, right? Or at least not in the form of what compliance, we understand compliance today. And so I think this is one of the biggest challenges, was to lead people to understand that survival for us means being compliant forever. So there's no third chance, right? And even the second chance is not that easy, so you don't want to have to come second time around and say, we did it again. No, that's not going to work. You're done, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Richard, you completed your, let's say, transformational journey, to use the words we chose for the title for this panel, by becoming a consultant, and again, a leading figure in the compliance practice around the world. When did you start thinking about that? How to take those trains coming at you and turn that situation into an opportunity and own what you had done, right? What was the moment in time in which you decided to go that way?
It was almost an accident. And when I got home from prison, it was December 2013. So in early 2014, Gustavo, I'm diving into the compliance field. I'm just so interested to see what's going on. And I saw that there was no shortage of well-experienced, fantastic practitioners coming from the legal profession, the forensic profession, the investigatory world, and then just general practitioners. And what I didn't see is anyone talking about what it's actually like out there to be tasked with commercial success in high-risk and volatile regions and environments. So with no business model at all, I just started to write about it. And we're talking long, like 3,000 word pieces, and putting it out there. And I'm like, if this story can help organizations look at their culture, like, are we incentivizing people to do the right thing, or are we giving them mixed signals, right? I'm happy to talk about what that looks like. And after about a year of writing, it's sort of when we connected on social media, and I was asked to speak at compliance events and anti-bribery conferences. And by the way, my judge, I could not travel during my supervised release. So it wasn't until 2017 that I had my civil rights and my passport restored. And I got caught in 2007. So this was a 10-year journey from start to end. And at that time, I was being asked to come to organizations and speak to their compliance teams or their commercial teams. It was sort of a cautionary tale type of presentation or workshop. It's much different now. Now I have the honor and privilege of flying all over the world, talking to leadership teams. And what am I talking to them about? Culture. Not you need a better third-party risk management platform, or you should look at your due diligence. It's how do we shift this conversation from risk to responsibility? And that's a business responsibility, not just a compliance responsibility. So in some, Gustavo, for what I do now, it started off just by blogging in 2014 and seeing if it could help organizations and people avoid the situation that I was in because it was totally avoidable, and it's also not all that unique.
Well, we can say that was very successful blogging, okay?
Thank you.
So,
The culture, about culture,
yeah,
Gustavo.
I was about to ask about culture, so go ahead.
So this is something that when we look at what happened with the company from 2016, when the company starts cooperating, and mid 16 also, there's this commitment that is signed by all executives that we will from now on comply with, there's this acting ethically with integrity and transparency. And then there were like 10 commandments that were signed by, the top executives in the company. And that was the first push of that program that for 6 years now was monitored. First, the monitor worked for the Department of Justice for 3 years. And one of the things that they would do is interview people from all over, all hierarchical levels, all departments, to understand how is it that people perceive the compliance program, how is it that people perceive the message that they're receiving, if it's clear, what they're to do, they're not to do, where to go for help, where to go for, with a tip, or a whistleblower, etc. And that has been happening for 6 years now, and we've just received the final, report from the same independent monitor who worked for the Department of Justice and then for the World Bank and the IDB, and stating that the company has actually embedded the compliance program into its day-to-day operations, and this is what they found. And that is, I think, the most important. What was the question here? Someone asked earlier today, give me one thing. I think that one thing is culture, and I think this was the answer earlier today.
Yeah. And so, are you done with culture at the company?
We're never done.
You're
We'll never be done.
That's the point. That's the point. And indeed, it's interesting because in the end, that's the standard that is expected from any company, that the compliance program really lives within the culture of the company. So it's nothing special because the company was involved in a massive corruption scandal, right? That's what should be expected from a compliance program. Try to influence people's behavior by becoming embedded in the company's culture. So, Richard, I'm asking the 2023 Richard now, okay? So, it's the international expert in these kind of topics that not only learned from his own experience in the past with the authorities that we just discussed, but also learned from discussing these topics with other leaders around the world, major companies and other experts in different regions of the planet. So what would you say are the key elements for a company to achieve the type of culture that a compliance program requires?
Yeah. It might be worth it to take a survey using one of something that Maria shared earlier today, is to ask your business teams, do you feel that ethics and compliance is adding value to your work, adding value to your company? So I think one of the measures of this is really how this is all embraced by your business peers. And I think that's where we're a little bit stuck, because we've built these great risk and compliance platforms, right? But they're still stuck in the ethics and compliance department. And that's been a bit of a problem, because I don't think leaders appreciate, and now I'm speaking a little bit as former commercial Richard, that when ethical expectations are coming out of the voice of business, not just the voice of compliance, that it sounds so much louder, because like you talked about, Rafael, doing what's right isn't a support function around here. Doing what's right is how we conduct ourselves. And that's a corporate narrative, not a compliance narrative. So very often I'm asked by a compliance leader to try to help empower their business peers to appreciate that now the great risk platform and box has been built, Now it's time to hand it over to them to help them make better decisions, right? To help them with decision making so that they have a balanced mindset between risk and innovation, which go hand in hand, especially now in a time of economic uncertainty, where people might think of three things if they think their job is on the line: me, and me. So that power of the corporate narrative is so powerful right now.
Absolutely. So you both mentioned that enforcement, right? Investigations, regulation in different countries may differ a lot, right? What about culture for a cross-border company? Or in your case, I mean, as an expert, you have discussed this topic with many companies. In your case, you are living it, right? So how will the fact that a company operates in different countries impact in the goal of building this type of culture?
Wow, we've just faced that with, we put out this very comprehensive Respect Transforms campaign. And it's, about promoting respect for, for the colleagues and the employees, and respecting the workplace and all of that, and avoiding workplace issues and harassment and discrimination and other issues that we may find. And when we were looking at that campaign with the eyes from the perspective of someone in São Paulo, Brazil, and then thinking, okay, but does that message resonate in the Northeast, or in the Amazon, or in a construction site in the middle of nowhere? And how about Africa? How about Angola? And so one of the things that we've tried to make sure we have in that campaign is that we invited people from Angola, women and men from Angola, to try to understand at what stage they were discussing some of these issues, and whether we would not sound like bringing something extraneous that they would look at and say, what are you talking about, right? And we felt that with compliance programs from the U.S. in Brazil 20 years ago. They would bring the program packaged and say, this is what you're doing, this is what this is the message, and you would receive that feedback. It was like, it doesn't resonate with us, right? And so that effort of having to, try to understand where that, society is in terms of the, respect for women and the place that women has in the society and all of that. And of course, we have our rules, and we want to push for that within the walls and within the company. Those are the rules, but we also need to understand that there's some steps that they are yet to take, and when maybe we can help push for those steps to be taken.
Absolutely. Richard, any
I'm glad
comment?
Rafael went first, because I totally agree with what you just said. Just say no to bribery. I don't call that a policy. I call that a wall poster, right? Because that's not operationalizing ethics and integrity. And like Rafael just shared, like, this looks different in different parts of the world. It's not a one-size-fits-all problem or solution. So my experience with corruption in LATAM was much different than it was in the Middle East. And I think by inviting those teams in and having an open feedback loop is critical, because who knows risk best? The people who work in the middle of it. So by inviting your teams to say, okay, tell us about the stubborn and persistent risks, but more importantly, what are the emerging ones? What are we not thinking about? So we can help calibrate our code and our policies, our campaigns and our messages to the real world risks that you face. But if you don't tell us what they are, we're not going to know. So I think we really need to take the extra step of understanding, as Rafael shared, what does this look like where people work? And are we giving them the tools that they need in their operating environment to ultimately say no? But how you get there, that's much different.
I remember a time years ago when we started the practice at Marval. There were cases in which you were facing this question. Okay, this person, we have reasonable suspicion that this person has been involved in bribery. This person is a member of a company, right? An executive. So should the company fire that person or not? There were many positions that could be adopted. But listening to what you say, there should be a different question nowadays, which is we have this person or these persons who cannot adapt to the culture of the company. So how do you identify those persons, and what do you do about that?
Well, I think first of all, the way we have divided the team and the functions within the compliance department is that we have those who work on the processes like managing the hotline or carrying out due diligence background checks or the continuous monitoring of key sensitive transactions, high-risk transactions and all of that. And so it's kind of more of a back office type work. And then there's the field compliance officers. And so those are the people who are closer to the business. They are involved early on. They're looking at what's in the pipeline, what are the projects we're pursuing, and they are observing who are those, business people that are truly in line and understand what we expect and bring issues up. And that's something that in the question of to what extent we add value, we have been more and more, we have been seeing people look for the compliance department to help them, manage a risk or manage a situation that they identify and that they know that it could potentially become a problem later and they want to deal with it early on. And then there are those that let's say you present the result of a due diligence report that is all bloody, right? It's more than red. And you're saying, no, we cannot hire these people, right? And then you still see people saying, I heard that such and such company uses them, or that, maybe, well, it's not yet a final decision, unappealable, or what. It's like, come on, you start to notice who is it that's on board and understood and gets it, and those who not. And I wouldn't say that they do not fit. I think that there's also a lot of education that goes on using the cases and the situations to show that, you see, you were going to get in trouble with that. This was going to hurt you. And now you see, we didn't use these guys. Now we're on the TV and then they're, all over the place. And thank God we're not using them.
Absolutely. Guys, we are reaching the end of the panel. We have 2 more minutes to go. So I will ask both of you to take 1 minute each and give the audience any final comments on this particular topic that we are discussing today. Richard, you can go first.
Well, I think, one of the things we really need to think about in our compliance journey and our cultural journey, which has no end, it's like cycling uphill, we have to keep doing it, is to really think about the current environment that people face right now. We've got economic uncertainty, anxiety, and stress in the workforce. We have more of a remote working environment where people might feel disconnected from the company and they might be more willing to take a shortcut to show their virtual value to the company. So I think this is an important cultural moment to really focus on the workforce. And if you know the anxiety and tension exists, why not proactively address it? And if someone's not calling you with a problem that should be, maybe this is the perfect time to just pick up the phone and see how people are doing and see how they're managing and establish some really foundational relationships without a crisis.
Thank you, Richard. Rafael?
I think that the tension has been, growing and growing in terms of all the risks that we see. We have, the war in Ukraine and what else could happen. And you have, global warming and you have all this crazy world where you don't know what's true or not because people just, distribute, facts or whatever. And in that environment, for you to try to get people focused on doing, the right thing and doing their job and not distracting with, everything else. And also mental health, which is another issue that we see that is terrible, and it's a growing problem, growing issue that companies need to cope with.
Absolutely. So thank you both. It's been quite clear that culture and people are the keywords, right, to keep from this panel. Thank you again. We will be back in 1 minute for the panel with
Wow, thank you
forensic
very much.
experts.
Pleasure.